The mine passed every safety inspection. Then investigators found a warning report that nobody could explain. The report predicted the exact area where everything went wrong. The mine was considered one of the safest operations in the region. For years, inspectors praised its safety record. Production targets were met. Expansion plans moved forward. Investors were satisfied. Workers trusted the system around them. The company frequently highlighted its commitment to safety. On paper, everything appeared under control. But years later, investigators uncovered a report buried deep inside company archives. The report had been written before a major incident. It described geological concerns inside a section of the mine that continued operating normally. The document was reviewed. The document was filed. And then it disappeared. At least that was the official explanation, because when investigators finally found it years later, they realized the report was only the beginning of a much larger story. The report came from a senior geologist. He had spent most of his career underground. He understood how small changes inside a mine could become serious problems years later. During routine analysis, he noticed unusual readings. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible to workers, but enough to raise concern. Several rock formations were showing signs of instability. Water movement inside the mine appeared different from previous surveys. The geologist recommended additional studies, additional monitoring, additional time. The recommendation was simple: do not expand operations into the affected section until more data becomes available. The report was submitted. Management acknowledged receiving it, and expansion continued anyway. Years later, investigators searched for the original report. At first, they assumed it had simply been archived. Mining companies generate enormous amounts of documentation: survey maps, safety audits, geological studies, inspection records. Documents often disappear into storage. But something felt unusual. References to the report appeared everywhere. Emails mentioned it. Meeting notes discussed it. Planning documents referenced its conclusions. Yet the report itself could not be found. Investigators found evidence that the report existed, evidence that people had discussed it, evidence that decisions had been made because of it. But not the report itself. It was as if someone had removed the document while leaving behind its shadow. The first serious warning came from monitoring instruments. Sensors installed deep underground began recording unusual changes. Pressure readings increased. Ground movement accelerated. Water infiltration appeared in unexpected locations. Engineers reviewed the data. Additional measurements were collected. Reports were submitted. The official explanation was cautious. Further observation was recommended. No emergency action was taken. Years later, investigators reviewing the records noticed something disturbing. The same area producing unusual readings had been highlighted in the missing geological report years earlier. The same location, the same concerns, the same unanswered questions, and the mine appeared to be repeating a warning that had already been ignored. Several months before the incident, the former engineer sent a letter to a government mining regulator. The letter described concerns that had never been fully addressed: ground instability, increasing water pressure, expansion into areas that required additional study. The regulator acknowledged receiving the document. Then the trail went cold. Years later, investigators searched for evidence of follow-up action. They found almost nothing. No major review, no special inspection, no public response. The warning had entered the system, then it disappeared inside it. Yet copies of portions of the letter survived inside unrelated files. And when investigators compared those fragments to the missing geological report, they discovered something remarkable. The concerns matched almost perfectly. Two warnings, years apart, pointing toward the same underground section. The mine continued expanding. New extraction zones opened. Additional tunnels were developed. Production targets increased. Executives celebrated record output. But underground conditions were changing. Water management systems worked harder every year. Ventilation networks became more complex. Maintenance crews reported recurring issues in the same areas. Each problem seemed manageable. Each issue received a local solution. Yet no one appeared willing to step back and examine the bigger picture. Years later, investigators reviewing thousands of pages of records noticed something obvious. The mine was not experiencing isolated problems. The same section appeared repeatedly. The same concerns appeared repeatedly. The same warnings appeared repeatedly. And almost every one of them pointed toward the area identified years earlier in the missing report. The mine continued expanding. New extraction zones opened. Additional tunnels were developed. Production targets increased. Executives celebrated record output. But underground conditions were changing. Water management systems worked harder every year. Ventilation networks became more complex. Maintenance crews reported recurring issues in the same areas. Each problem seemed manageable. Each issue received a local solution. Yet no one appeared willing to step back and examine the bigger picture. Years later, investigators reviewing thousands of pages of records noticed something obvious. The mine was not experiencing isolated problems. The same section appeared repeatedly, the same concerns appeared repeatedly, the same warnings appeared repeatedly, and almost every one of them pointed toward the area identified years earlier in the missing report. Then came the review that should have changed everything. A team of outside specialists examined geological data, maintenance records and underground surveys. Their findings were serious. Several indicators suggested increasing instability. Additional testing was recommended. Expansion should be slowed until more information became available. The recommendation moved through multiple departments: operations, finance, planning, management. Everyone understood what delays would mean: lost production, missed targets, higher costs. Over time the language changed. Urgent recommendations became observations, observations became suggestions, and suggestions eventually disappeared from the final summary. By the time the review reached senior leadership, much of its original urgency was gone. The day of the incident began like any other. Workers arrived before dawn. Equipment moved underground. Supervisors reviewed production schedules. Nothing appeared unusual. Then, deep inside the mine, monitoring systems recorded a series of abnormal readings. At first, operators assumed it was a sensor problem. False alarms happened occasionally, but the readings continued. Pressure increased. Ground movement accelerated. Water began entering areas where it had never appeared before. Emergency teams were notified. Supervisors began reviewing evacuation procedures. And within a short period of time, what had started as a routine shift became something very different. Something investigators would spend years trying to understand. The investigation began almost immediately. Inspectors entered the affected areas. Engineers reviewed monitoring systems. Geologists examined rock samples. Government agencies collected records. At first, everyone focused on the immediate event. What triggered the instability? What failed underground? What warning signs appeared first? But the deeper investigators looked, the more the case changed. The incident was not simply about geology. It was about decisions. Reports had existed. Recommendations had existed. Warnings had existed. And again, the most serious concerns had been delayed, softened or ignored. The investigation was no longer about a mine. It was becoming a story about information. Months into the investigation, an archivist made an unexpected discovery. Inside a forgotten storage facility sat dozens of unopened boxes connected to older mining projects. Most contained routine paperwork, survey maps, equipment inventories, inspection schedules, but one box carried a reference code connected directly to the mine. Inside were draft reports, correspondence and geological reviews, and among them sat the document investigators had spent months searching for. The original geological warning report. Not a summary, not a copy. The original report. Its pages revealed concerns far more serious than anyone expected. Several recommendations had never appeared in official records. Important findings had been removed. Warnings had been softened. Risks had been minimized. For the first time, investigators could compare the original report with the approved version. When investigators placed the two reports side by side, the pattern became obvious. The original version described significant geological concerns. The approved version described manageable operational challenges. Entire paragraphs were missing. Technical conclusions had been rewritten. Recommendations had disappeared. No one knew exactly when the edits occurred, but somebody had changed the report before final decisions were made. The discovery transformed the investigation. This was no longer simply a mining incident. It was an information case. Who changed the report? Who approved the changes? Who benefited from continued expansion? Investigators interviewed former executives, engineers and managers. Some claimed they had never seen the original report. Others refused to discuss it. And the more questions investigators asked, the more resistance they encountered. The investigation never identified a single individual responsible, at least not officially. Instead, evidence pointed toward a chain of decisions, spread across multiple levels of the organization. One recommendation delayed, one concern downgraded, one review postponed, one report modified. Each decision seemed small on its own. Together, they changed the future of the project. Investigators concluded that no single mistake caused the crisis. It was the accumulation of compromises, small decisions repeated over time, a culture where warnings became obstacles instead of information. And by the time anyone recognized the scale of the problem, reversing those decisions had become extremely difficult. After years of analysis, interviews and document reviews, Investigators reached their conclusion. The incident was not caused by a single geological event. The event merely exposed conditions that had existed for years. Those conditions had been identified, documented, reported, and repeatedly underestimated. The buried report did not predict every detail of what eventually happened, but it identified the same area investigators later focused on. The concerns were real, the recommendations were reasonable, and earlier action could have significantly reduced the risks. Perhaps not prevented every consequence, but changed the outcome. For investigators, that became the central lesson of the case. The warning had existed all along. Today, the original geological report remains one of the most important documents connected to the case, not because it predicted the future, not because it contained a shocking secret, but because it proved something investigators already feared. The warning existed, the evidence existed, the questions existed. Long before the incident, the report survived, the archive survived, the signatures survived, and together they revealed a truth more disturbing than any conspiracy. Most disasters do not begin with a collapse. They begin with a warning. A warning that seems manageable, a warning that can wait until tomorrow, a warning that someone assumes another person will handle. And years later, investigators open a forgotten file and discover that the disaster did not begin when something went wrong. It began when someone chose not to listen. Case file closed.